Discover the secrets to taking control of your time at work in today's episode, where we dive into the art of setting boundaries and retraining colleagues for better productivity and respect. Stay tuned to learn how to turn those incessant just 5 minutes requests into moments of efficiency and respect for your schedule. Hi, I'm Mark, and this is the Mr. Productivity Podcast, the show that is dedicated to empowering you to conquer distractions, prioritize effectively, and gain daily clarity. Now, before we begin the show, let me ask you a very serious question. Are you ready to elevate your life? Well, I'm hoping you answered not just yes, but yes! Well, then I want to invite you to join us over at The Productive Life. This is a free email newsletter that is delivered every Saturday, packed with insights to revamp your daily routine. Each week, I bring you no-nonsense tips to help you live, well, the productive life. With the productive life, you can expect to learn how to exceed your goals, boost your daily hustle, and balance intense work with relaxing downtime. Oh yeah. Time is precious, my friend, and my strategies are the key to achieving your dreams. Don't miss out on upgrading your productivity. Head on over to MrProductivity.com right now for free and subscribe. MrProductivity.com, MISTER, and transform your day, your everyday, 7 days a week into a win. All right, enough of my blather. Let's get going. Now, before we get started, what I'm about to teach you will involve you setting boundaries and perhaps retraining your coworkers. Now, I've dealt with many clients who've had this issue with setting up barriers. And what's interesting is I ask them when they tell me they're having problems with their coworkers, I ask them, is it everybody or is it a handful? And the answer is always a handful. So you might not have to retrain all your coworkers, but just a few. Let's say you have 10 people in your office. There's probably a really good chance that about 3 or 4 of them are really violating your time space. And we need to get those people under control. But we don't want to just target those 3 or 4 people. We want to target everybody. So everybody is on the same page of the hymnal, as we say in church. Now, in all cases, all the advice I'm going to give you in this podcast, it's imperative that you stay professional. I don't care if this is in a professional environment or a personal environment. Make sure you stay courteous, professional. Don't be rude. Don't use vulgar language. Don't get up in their face, because people are much more likely to listen to you and do as you suggest if you are professional. So keep that in the back of your mind. So one of the things I get asked a lot is, what do I do about those pesky interruptions? You know, the ones they come knock on your door and they say, hey, you got 5 minutes? Well, first of all, you know as well as I do, it's never, ever 5 minutes. Ever. They just want their foot in your door. And of course, you don't have any time. And how do you handle this? What do you do? Well, first of all, let your no be no. Okay. If you truly don't have the time, tell them so. And don't give in. Set those boundaries. Stay strong. Offer a time later, maybe that day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, when you can give them the time. Because for me, I don't like being interrupted. Number one, I'm probably in the middle of doing something else that requires my full attention. But number two, I can't give you the full attention because now you just interrupted me from doing something else. And if I schedule time for you later, well, guess what happens? Now I can devote that time to helping you. Now, if they persist, if they say, hey, I really need 5 minutes, it's only 5 minutes, and you do, in fact, have 5 minutes, then here's what I want you to do. In front of them, as they're standing either in the door of your office, the doorway of your cubicle, in front of your desk, I want you to grab your smartphone. And I want you to open up the timer. I want you to set that timer for 5 minutes. I want you to start it. And then I want you to say, go. Now, more times than not, they're going to look at you and say, are you serious? And you reply, yes. And as a matter of fact, now you only have 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Now, if they tell you that it won't work, you say, hey, that's fine. I tell you what, I have 15 minutes at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Will that work for you? Now, they may start talking. They may just start go, okay, well, I'm just gonna blurt it all over you. Well, if they start talking, be sure to tell them when there's only 1 minute left. Because by setting that boundary, while telling them, hey, you have 1 minute left, now you're saying, hey, I'm serious. You better wrap it up real quickly. What happens if they say, all right, it's really going to take more than 5 minutes, which you knew that already. You say, great. Let's do it at 2 o'clock. I'll put you on my calendar. I'll devote 100% of my time at 2 o'clock for 15 minutes. You say, great. See you then. Problem solved. Now, if they say they can't wait and they tell you it's really, really important, you're going to have to judge for yourself because you probably know this individual, whether you can break your rule or not. In other words, if you can go longer than 5 minutes. But if you really, truly don't have 5 minutes, if you only have 1 minute, make sure you tell them that. Don't kind of like beat around the bush and tell them that. Tell them that. I don't have any time. I am wall-to-wall this morning or wall-to-wall this afternoon, or I'm slammed all week. Be honest with them. Tell them, hey, listen, I hear you. I understand you need 5 minutes. I don't have 5 minutes to give you. People will begin to respect you. And more often than not, it's going to be a very small group of people this is going to affect. When they show up later at 2 o'clock for that 15-minute conversation with you, make sure you give them the courtesy of 100% of your attention. If you don't, all the training you did earlier in the day or earlier in the week is all for naught. You have to give them that 15 minutes. If something comes up and you can't, have the courtesy to email them, call them, text them ahead of time and say, look, I really apologize. We're supposed to talk in 45 minutes at 2 o'clock. I can't do it. Something more pressing came up. That shows that you're courteous. Don't just wait till they show up at your office and say, oh, sorry, I forgot all about it, which tells them you didn't put it in your calendar, which tells them you weren't serious. Be professional and be courteous. Now, a lot of people ask me, what happens if it's a superior, an executive in my office? Well, if they're worth their salt, as the saying goes, then I would highly, highly encourage you to stick to your guns and say, look, I know you're my superior. Now, don't use these exact words, but I know you're my superior, but I'm wall to wall with work. I have no spare time. Now, because you are my superior, how important is this over everything else I'm working on? I'm working on A, B, C, D, and E. Now, if they're a really good leader, they're going to say, oh, wow. Tell you what, this is kind of important. Why don't you give A, B, and C to Jennifer, and then we'll talk about my other issue. If they're not, if they just lay it on top of you, then you have to explain them, again, in a very courteous and professional manner. Say, hey, look, something's got to give. I can't do everything you've asked me to do. So what's my priority? Put the ball back in their court. Again, if they're a quality leader, they're going to listen to you and say, okay, either I have to go to someone else or I have to delegate some work for this individual, and so they have time to work on it. All right? So that's how you deal with, hey, got 5 minutes. Again, it is a retraining issue. It happens to everybody, happens in offices, whether they're big, medium, or small, around the world. But you got to take the bull by the horns, as we say here in Texas, and you have to grab it and say, hey, listen, I really don't have 5 minutes right now. Or I do only have 5 minutes right now. Hope that makes sense to you. Now, let's talk about the 4 barriers that you have to deal with at work. First of all, chairs in the office. Now, most offices, whether it's a cubicle or a regular office, have chairs. And the problem with chairs is when someone, you know this, when someone walks into your office and they sit down and get comfortable, they are far more likely to stay longer rather than not. So my first suggestion, if you are able, is to get rid of those chairs out of your office. Now, this may seem kind of weird, but stay with me here, because no one's going to come in your office and stand for a long period of time, and they're certainly not going to sit down on the floor. And so by removing the comfortable chairs, you're going to set up an environment where people, if they do come in your office, they're not going to stay real long. Let's say your boss says, nope, the chairs have to stay. Well, a tip I gave to a psychologist friend of mine, not friend, a former client of mine, is put books and papers and files and folders and whatnot in the chairs. So when people come in your office, especially if you have a cubicle or an office without a door, or if your company makes you keep the door open, that way, again, nobody has some place to sit down. Again, they're not going to sit on the floor and they're not going to stay in there for a long period of time. And if they look at the chair and look back at you and look at the chair and look back at you, you could say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm working on something. I can't move that stuff. What can I help you with? You're going to shorten the amount of time they're wasting of you. Think about that. You have to remove the barriers. Another barrier is your calendar, and this comes in two parts. Number one, make sure you're sharing your calendar. Now, on Outlook, which a lot of corporations use, you can put things on your calendar that shows you as busy, but, and this is key, they don't know what you're doing. You could be taking a nap for 3 hours, but on your calendar, it says busy. Because if you don't appear to be busy on your calendar, people think you have time. So I'm not saying to lie. Don't misunderstand me. Don't lie and say that you're busy when you're really not. But if you need to work on a project, if you need to do some research, if you need to do some interviews, whatever the case may be, make sure you don't leave your calendar blank. Because anybody else who has access to your calendar is going to see, wow, they've got nothing to do. Let me stop in and shoot the breeze for you with them for a couple hours. You don't have time for that. So let people know by sharing your calendar, and I'm not going to go into a tutorial how to do that here on Outlook on this podcast. Real easy, just go Google it. How do I share my calendar on Outlook? The information's out there. Now, the other part of a calendar is get yourself a ginormous wall calendar that you can put in your office. Hopefully you have office walls. If not, hopefully someplace you can put it in your office. You need to get a big calendar, not one of those small desk calendars. You need a big calendar. And what you're going to do is you're going to put the big projects on here. You're not going to put like the small little 15, 20-minute things, but the big things. Because when people, again, come in your office, they see your big, ginormous wall calendar, and they see it's full, that tells them in their brain, wow, this person is very busy. I better either get to the point or I better set up a time to talk to them later. Again, you're training people. You're establishing boundaries. Very, very important. If you don't show people that you're busy, how are they going to know? A quick tangent here about retraining people. Depending how long you've been in the job, it may take you days, weeks, months, even half a year to retrain people. And when you start retraining them, you can't let up on the gas pedal. If you do, they're going to think, oh, okay, I can go back to the way things are, the way things used to be. The fourth barrier is the power of no. Do you have to go to that 2-hour meeting? Do you have to go to the company's 3-hour lunch? Do you have to be included in a reply all email chain? Exercise the power of no. I tell my audiences and my clients that every time you say yes to someone or something, you have no idea how many people or things you're saying no to because you can't say into the future. I want you to think about that. When you say yes, you have no idea how many things you're saying no to. So the bottom line to that is to guard your time jealously, because at the stroke of midnight every day, unless it's your final day on this big blue planet of ours, you get 24 hours. So does Oprah Winfrey. So does Elon Musk. So does Tony Robbins. Everybody gets 24 hours in a day. And when it's gone, it's not like money you can save in the bank. It's not like cookies you can save, put in the freezer and save for another day. You have to use it or you lose it. And so you have to guard your time. Where is your time going? Are you going to 2-hour meetings and you walk out of there and you go, why was I at that meeting? I mean, I remember when I used to be an inventory control coordinator for a local hospital many years ago. And I used to work at an offsite warehouse. And once a month, we had to go to the big medical center here in Houston and have a meeting. Now, because I was at the offsite warehouse, it took like a half an hour to leave my office, drive over to the medical center, park in the parking garage, walk up to the meeting. So there's a half-hour shot, half hour on the way back too. That's 1 hour gone. And then you get in the meeting. Let's say the meeting's 10 o'clock. Now, the meeting never starts at 10 o'clock because some people get 9:50 and they talk and talk. Some people show up at 10:05, 10:15. They do a recap. So the meeting probably starts around 10:15, 10:20, 10:25. The meeting lasts about an hour. Now you're almost at near 11:30. And then you have to chit-chat before you leave. And then you get back at noon. So you lost like 3 hours in my case. Maybe your meetings are like right down the hall. But still, for some reason, people who hold meetings feel that everybody's got to be involved in the meeting. Do they really? I remember reading one of the Steve Jobs books. I can't think of the title. It may have been Steve Jobs, maybe the title of it. Walter Isaacson, I think is the name of the book. And he used to tell the story where people who came to meetings held by Steve Jobs, he only wanted people there who had to be there. And one time, there was a meeting with, I think, 5 or 6 people. And Steve started talking about, I think it was the first iPhone they were inventing. And he stopped in mid-sentence. He looked at this lady who was there. He stopped and goes, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "My boss told me I should come." And her boss was sitting right next to her. And Steve said, "We won't be needing you." And the poor lady had to get up in front of these other 5 or 6 big people at Apple and walk out. But Steve did not want anybody who did not want to be there at the meeting. Now, I'm not saying you have to be that coarse, that mean-spirited. But if you're invited to a meeting, and let's say you're in HR, and the meeting is about why the break room is always left a mess, do you really need to be there? I mean, you need to think about that. You need to stop and think, do you really need to be at these meetings? When the company has a 3-hour business lunch, and the company's picking up the tab, do you really need to go? Because you got a ton of work to do. You need to approach these people and say, look, do I really need to go here? Because some people are meeting addicts, and you know the people I'm talking about. They love going to meetings, and they want everybody else to go to meetings. But guess what happens when you go to meetings? Nothing. Nothing gets done. So exercise the power of no when it comes to your time. Guard it jealously. So which of the things I mentioned on the podcast today that you are not doing that maybe you need to start doing in your life so you can improve your productivity? And what did you think about the chairs in the office thing? Have you ever thought about that before? Because a lot of people have at least 2 chairs in front of their desk, and they have guests come in and they stay a very long time. So I really hope that this episode served you well. It would do me a huge favor, and future listeners of this show a huge favor, if you would subscribe, rate, and review this show. That'll tell the podcast player you're listening to on to share this to more people so I can help them as I helped you. And don't forget to head on over to MrProductivity.com, M-I-S-T-E-R, MrProductivity.com for all things Mr. Productivity. So you can sign up for the free Productive Life email newsletter, find out about my paid community, which is called the Productive Life Community. Also, you can find out a little bit about me on my About page, and you can read my blog. Everything you want is at MrProductivity.com. Thank you so much for your time and attention, for listening to this episode of the Mr. Productivity Podcast. I'll be back real soon with a brand new episode. Until then, remember, stay productive and stay positive.